What happens when you strip the music from one of the best horror movies? Well, that's what I want to find out today, because especially in horror movies, we all know how effective music is at creating tension or enhancing that jump scare effect. Knowing that Get Out won several Academy Awards, one of which being Best Picture, I was especially curious to find out what would happen to this movie without any music. To figure that out, I used AI to remove all music and most sound effects from Get Out. That means a scene like this
Get out! Yo! Yeah! Yo! Get out!
suddenly turns into this.
Get out! Yo! Yeah! Yo! Get out!
And that's how I watched this entire movie. Now, before I'll get into my general experience of watching this movie without music and share some of its really interesting visual techniques with you, I want to give you the feeling of what it's like to watch Get Out without music. So here are 5 scenes that really show just how much music shapes the way we experience a movie, ranked from least to most extreme. And feel free to let me know which scenes you found most surprising. We're gonna start off very subtle with the first scene. Here we just arrived at the family's house, and as the camera zooms out, we see one guy just staring at them. Without music or sound effects, this scene is completely quiet. How did it feel? Quite strange, right? We all know that this is not a normal behavior for somebody, so we know that something's not right. But with music, this becomes a lot more obvious. The musical cue as we see the guy standing there signals very clearly that this means danger. It's a very small example, but it shows how much easier a scene is to read when you add music. In terms of how different this scene feels, I'd give it a 3 out of 10. The music makes a difference, but the visuals alone still communicate the same message, especially because of how long we're actually keeping this wide shot of the house. Even without the guy standing there, we know that this is not how you would usually show a family meeting. This already puts that uncomfortable feeling in our head. It's really great cinematography. The next scene where music is used very intentionally is when we meet the first black guest.
Good to see another brother around here.
Yeah, even without any musical cue, we know that this is super creepy and suspicious. Also, I love the expression we get from Chris. He went from being so happy to see him to this, like, bro, what the hell? This time it's less the cinematography, instead it's all down to acting. Just the way he turns so slowly and his eyes wander so unnaturally. It's almost as if he's remote controlled, like a puppet, which when you've seen this movie is quite fitting. This is how the scene originally sounds.
Good to see another brother around here.
As soon as he moves, that tense music starts playing, which again just makes the scene a lot easier to understand. But because this time the music is more prominent, I'll give it a 4 out of 10. A bit later in this movie, we see this guy again as Chris accidentally uses his flashlight. The original scene sounds like this. Clearly there is very loud music to heighten the drama, but without music the scene feels like this. I almost feel like this scene becomes even more visceral and raw without music. You see, one effect of adding music is that it makes a scene less immersive, because in real life you just wouldn't have music playing, but that's not a bad thing, sometimes you want exactly that. But in this case, I really enjoyed the added immersion. It made me feel his pain even more. This is a 6 out of 10 for me, it's quite the difference. But now to some more extreme examples. In the first night, Chris heads outside and suddenly this happens. How did it feel for you? For me, it felt awkward, strange, like, what the heck was that? Without music, I didn't really know what to feel here, so I would just be confused. With music, the intended emotion becomes very clear. Suspenseful and scary, that's the emotion I'm getting now. Now, admittedly, I think this scene was pretty weird even with music, but because it functioned even less without music, this is an 8 out of 10 for me. The music was very essential for this scene. But the last, and for me most different scene in this movie happens relatively late. It's when we first find out about the procedure this family is doing in the basement and they're getting ready. Without music and sound effects, the scene is again completely quiet. Is this creepy? Yes. Is it scary? I think so, but you'll never guess what emotion the music adds to this scene. With this kind of music, it suddenly gets a very sinister, almost religious vibe. At least that religious vibe is completely lost for me without the music. And it's a great example of having great visuals, but being able to add an entirely new feeling to the scene just by adding certain music. And I think the religious vibe is very fitting, but because we didn't get that visually and it comes entirely from the music, this is a 9 out of 10 for me. It's a pretty big difference. I hope these scenes gave you a good feeling of what the experience was like for me. Which of these scenes do you think was the most different without music? Please let me know in the comments below. And now, as I promised, here are some of the clever visual techniques this movie uses to still function without music. Besides the regular horror movie emotions like fear, I think this movie wants to primarily make us feel uncomfortable.
Is it true? Is it better?
As you just heard, the dialogue is already great at doing this, but how do you make a shot visually uncomfortable? The movie achieves this by, for example, holding on to shots extremely long. It does this again and again, and I think it's a great technique. We're so used to fast cuts, so having scenes like this makes the family appear really strange. The next question now becomes, how do you visually let us know that our protagonist is feeling uncomfortable, besides great acting, of course? My favorite example for this is when Chris wakes up in the middle of the night and for no reason whatsoever, he suddenly decides to turn around this teddy bear. It's a great subtle visual cue that also doesn't need any dialogue for that matter, and we all know what he's doing, why he's doing it, without any explanation. Another great example of visual storytelling in this movie is how the camera work is also always done in a way that it focuses on the detail. Take this scene where she's tapping the spoon, for example. They could have had her tap the spoon in a wider shot like this one. Instead, they shift to a close-up on her face as the camera moves down to show us just the tap of the spoon. Maybe we don't always notice this consciously while watching, but subconsciously we all start to wonder what just happened. And we're not the only ones wondering. Chris is also very confused by these details. And we know this because they always make sure to show us his reaction to these relevant details, which I think is again a great technique. And do you know why so many scenes of this movie work without music? That's because more often than you would think, there actually is no music in the original. When I watched this movie without music, there were so many scenes where I thought, oh wow, this still feels so uncomfortable and creepy without music. That's going to be so interesting to talk about. But then I started writing the script and looked at the original, and probably about half of the time the original scene also didn't have any music in it.
Chris.
Cool.
So I guess what I wanted to say is also true for the original. Many scenes in this movie work really well even without music, which is quite surprising because if you think about it, not much is happening for the first hour of this movie. A girl visits her parents' house to introduce her new boyfriend to her family, and then they do normal family stuff like talk, do a house tour, eat together, and the next day some friends come by. On a surface level, this sounds super boring, right? However, it works because during these normal things, just like our protagonist Chris, we can't help but notice that something feels a bit off about this family. So we're constantly analyzing what's going on. Is it just the racism, or is there something bigger at play here? Not having any music to guide our emotions in so many scenes means that we have to figure out what or if something is wrong ourselves. It's something that I actually enjoyed even more in my edited version without any music, but even in the original, this movie really mastered the art of silence and pure dialogue. And respect to Jordan Peele, the director, because it takes some balls to not give your audience any music but just dialogue. Then you really need to have confidence in your screenplay. Also, I want to say congrats to Daniel Kaluuya, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, for his acting skill in this movie. We as an audience always try to gauge the emotion of a scene, and without any music, or in this case no sound at all, we are often solely dependent on the expression of the actors, and in every single situation when something strange or creepy happened, his reaction was exactly the same as mine. Here's one of my live reactions while watching.
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
Oh shit. Yeah, that's such a good first reaction. It's like, okay, I'm fucked. This makes the movie very immersive because especially in horror movies, we always ask ourselves, what would I do in this situation? So if the protagonist acts and reacts realistically, it immerses me even more in this situation. Also, I want to give a shout out to the dialogue in this movie. Having removed all sound effects made it stand out even more, and it's full of great details.
Tough break for your dad, though.
Yeah. You almost got over it.
I hope this experiment made you appreciate just how much thought goes into every frame of a movie. After having watched this movie without music, I can definitely understand why it got an award for Best Picture. It's really a great movie. I hope you liked my analysis. If so, check out my other videos and let me know what other movies we should watch without music, and I'll see you in the next one.